Today we've got a great session lined up, and we're going to focus on the practical side of supporting clients and maintaining those professional boundaries that keep things running smoothly for you.
Thanks, Brad. I might just go a little bit slower on time to allow a few people to join.
Sure.
While we're doing that, I suppose we'll add a few extra opening comments around whether you've been in the industry for a while or if you're just starting out. Today's session's really providing you with a few tips on how to work effectively with your clients while also staying professional and keeping things clear and respectful.
Yeah.
And lovely hellos we're getting from people.
Oh, there we go. Excellent. Yeah, and as you said, Linda, that's what today is all about. G'day there. Love the welcomes coming through.
Nice, isn't it?
Good to see. You're actually it's actually quite an honour today because we've got one of our longest standing Mable support workers joining us today to share her insights and experience. Her name is Marlene, and she's been a support worker on Mable for about 7 years. And she also happens to be my mum. So that she's got a lot of great tips to share. So grab a coffee, it's that time, maybe a wine, get comfy, and we'll dive into how we can make sure we're delivering the best support for our clients while protecting ourselves as well.
Thanks, Brad. And yeah, thanks again to everyone for the hellos, and huge welcome to Marlene. It's really lovely to have you with us. And yeah, I know that I'm certainly looking forward to your input.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah. And we have a few housekeeping points before we kind of kick off. We'll be, taking questions through the chat function, so feel free to pop those in. Obviously, time is always a challenge, so we might not be able to answer all of the questions that you have, but we really will do our best with the time that we have. To let you know, the session is, I'll cover that later. We'll have the team working in the background so we can answer the questions that are being asked the most. We'll pause at the end of each of the section and ask for a question. And we will also then follow up in an email some of the key questions that we weren't able to get to. I'd like to note that we will really focus the conversation on the topic of the day, so the professional practices and considerations. So if you have got any questions or comments around other issues, if you could direct those to the customer service team via the online chat function, that would be really great.
Yeah, all right, that all sounds good. And also, just so you know, we're going to be recording the webinar today. So if you do have to dash off, no problem. You can catch up what you missed out later on.
All right. And lastly, just picking up on that recording, I think that's going to be made available tomorrow or very shortly, along with the email, and that should be in certainly by the end of the week if we're including the responses to some of those questions. That will also include some links to a number of the resources that we make mention of. All righty.
Right. I can't see slides.
I'll do the acknowledgement. I'll do the acknowledgement if you like then, Brad. So before we dive into the content, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today.
Okay, so let's take a look at what we'll cover in this webinar. So first up, we're going to focus on understanding our clients' backgrounds and needs. So that's all about getting to know them as people, not just clients, and that will go a long way to help building those strong, trusting relationships.
All right, we'll also cover professional language and sensitivity. Knowing how to communicate in a way that's respectful and appropriate is really key to making sure you're always maintaining that professional relationship with your client.
Yeah, and then we'll jump in and have a look at support notes, what they are, why they matter, what needs to go in them, and we'll. And trust me, like, these notes are going to be way more important than just jotting down, quickly what happened during the visit.
And then finally, we'll go over the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. So this one's really crucial because boundaries help protect both you and the client, keeping things clear and safe for everyone involved. And don't worry, we'll give you the tools to recognise and maintain those boundaries throughout your work.
All right, let's start with the key to creating a good foundation as a support worker, understanding your client's needs and backgrounds. So part of getting to know your client is about understanding who's in their support network and who's helping them organise their care.
So sometimes the person organising the support is, of course, the client themselves, especially if they're self-managed. In those cases, they're the ones really calling the shots and making all the decisions. But then there are other times when a family member steps in to coordinate everything.
Yeah, and then I guess if your client's using NDIS funding, they could also have an NDIS coordinator to help them manage their plan. For those of you working with aged care clients, you're more likely to be working with a care manager or a case manager. These roles are super important because they're often ones keeping track of the bigger picture, things like budgets, goals, that sort of thing.
That's right. So why does all of this matter to you? Well, understanding who's involved in your client's care really helps you figure out who to communicate with. So if you're working with a client's family, for example, that might be your main point of contact. But if the client has a care manager, you'll need to keep them in the loop, especially if you need to update them on goals and any challenges as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, like knowing who's on the team means you're going to be more closely aligned with your client's needs. It's going to kind of help you stay on track and ensures that the kind of care you're providing fits in with the broader plan of that person. It's kind of like a sports team where everyone kind of has their role, and the better the team works, the smoother the game kind of flows for you.
Very appropriate analogy for you. And as you get to know the team involved, you'll see how everyone's working towards the same goal. So providing the best possible care for the client makes your job easier, and of course it makes the whole process a lot more effective.
Yeah, definitely. And there's going to be some people out there who may not know, who that person is in their client's life, and that's cool. Every client's different. And after this, you'll probably be able to figure it out quite easily. But kind of if you're unsure about who's organising the support or who you should be communicating with, just ask.
Yeah, that's right. What we're really trying to say is that understanding your client's support network really kind of helps you build that trust, and it can make your job easier and smoother.
Yeah, so let's kind of jump in now about why understanding your client is so important. So first of all, it's about building trust. That trust and respect with your client is kind of the foundation of everything that you do. When you know your client's unique needs and kind of their goals, we can really start to tailor our support to make it more effective for them.
Yeah, that's right, Brad. So personalising the care not only makes that client experience so much better, it can also make the work easier for you. So when you understand what your clients prefer, it helps them feel more comfortable, safe and supported. It's those little things that make all the difference. And I guess the other thing to be mindful of is that often the reason why clients actually come to Mable in the first place is because they're looking for somebody that gets them. They might be looking for somebody that has those shared interests or understands their culture or has particular experience that they really value. And that's a big part of what we promote and try to facilitate.
Yeah, exactly. So if that's what they're coming looking for, where do we fit and what should we kind of learn about our client? And then I guess is the next question. So and it all kind of starts with their personal background. So you want to kind of get to understand where they're coming from culturally, socially, any life experiences that they've had that, shape how they view the world. You really want to get an understanding of what's important to them. Maybe they have a certain interest or a particular tradition that they follow, maybe there's some limitations or around them or some incredible talents that they'd like to share. It's all these little things that matter when it comes it's really forming that relationship with them.
That's right. And then you really want to understand their day-to-day life. So what does a normal day actually look like for them?
Yeah.
Do they have a routine? You know, does that routine help them really feel comfortable? For example, maybe they start their day every morning with a walk, or they always read a newspaper before lunch. If you understand their day-to-day routine, you can better support them without disrupting things. It's kind of like knowing when it's the right time to offer help and when it's better just to let them do their thing.
Yeah, and then I guess I'm building on top of that. It's kind of like understanding what their goals are as well. Like, what do they want to achieve? You know, is it something like gaining more independence, or is it just being able to get involved in a favourite activity again, like tennis or fishing or the men's shed? And once you understand those, it's kind of then important to keep in the back of your mind that these goals could also change over time. So it's important to check in with them and adjust that as needed.
All right. And then after goals, the next thing is really that can help you gain a deeper understanding is understanding their support needs. So that might mean learning more about their disability. It might mean better understanding of any areas of concern that they have, condition, or a diagnosis if it's relevant. For some people, they might even have triggers that affect their behaviour, and getting an understanding of those is really important for allowing you to deliver the best care.
Yeah, and to help you along with this, Mabel's got the Learning Hub, which has heaps of modules on supporting people with things like dementia or working with people with ADHD and a host of other stuff as well. So now you kind of got, an understanding what you need to learn. I guess we need to look at, well, how do we do that? How do we actually build that understanding with the client? And one of the things you can do initially is, and we've probably all heard it before, is start to ask open-ended questions, so they can really be a lot more useful than the closed-ended questions. So you want to ask things like, how do you like to do things, or can you tell me more about your routine? Stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So those kind of questions help get them talking, and you can get some really valuable information, especially when you listen. So it's asking those questions and really listening, paying attention to not just the words, but also their tone and their body language. It can make a real difference, because sometimes it's actually what's unsaid that's just as important.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all heard it's not what you said, it's how you said it. At the beginning of a fight, no doubt. Right, so we can also start small around this stuff. You don't need to know everything about them in one sitting. It's kind of a process that you work through.
Yeah, and of course be patient. So they might not be ready to share everything right away. Allow them the space and time to open up when they're ready.
All right, so let's take a look, I guess, now at some examples of client preferences that you might come across. It's pretty interesting how different everyone can be, really. So,
yeah, exactly. So for some clients, routine is really like their lifeline. So, for instance, they might want to have their cup of tea at exactly 3 p.m, maybe take a walk right after lunch. It's kind of their thing, and sticking to it really makes them feel more comfortable, safe, supported. It can even be a way of allowing them to have a level of control over their life.
Yeah, who doesn't like a cup of tea at 3 in the afternoon, right? But once you know those kind of routines, it's easier to make them feel like everything's going just the way that they want.
Yep. And speaking of routines, don't forget about how your clients like to communicate. So some might want everything spelled out in clear, direct instructions. Others might prefer a more easygoing approach. You'll get to know which suits each client best as you go.
Yeah, and some of them don't even want all those formalities, right? Just a little chat when they're good. But some clients might really appreciate that structure. We've probably all got friends that are like that. They like the clear steps and instructions. And it's kind of all about figuring out what works for each individual, really.
And then the last example that we've given around client preferences is the physical comfort. So some clients might ask for a certain chair, the room temperature, needs to be just right, a little warmer, a little cooler. these things can really make a big difference in their day, and they might even be linked to a specific condition that they have.
Yeah, and those things sound small, but they can really totally change the experience for the client. Like the chair's comfy or the room's just the right temperature. They're going to feel more relaxed and at ease. And then you get into things like what common interests and shared interests do you have? So yeah, these preferences really important. And the more you learn about those things, the easier it's going to be to tailor your approach and make them feel right at home and that they enjoy you working with you, right?
That's exactly right. So that kind of is a bit of a wrap on our first section. And I wonder if we might actually go back to Marlene and just see if there's anything else that you kind of wanted to really add or reiterate, Marlene, around understanding your client's background and needs.
I think it's very important that when you arrive for a shift that you take the time to sit with the person and talk to them about the day before, what happened, or the week before, depending on how often you see them, that you sit and you listen to them, because you will learn so much about that person just by listening. So just as you said before, ask the open-ended questions. It's amazing what you'll learn about a person just by sitting with them 5 or 10 minutes before you actually start working with your person. Because listening is very, very important. And they'll know if you're not listening.
Indeed.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, Brad.
I was just saying thanks, Mum.
That's okay.
This is lovely kind of interaction going on here. Yeah, thanks, Marlene. And I think, we have the fortune of sitting here with Marlene, who really does have a wealth of experience. So, you're hearing from someone that really is in your shoes and brings that experience to the table. I'll just check in with the team. Have we kind of had any real outstanding questions? Or Marlene, did you have something else you wanted to add then?
No, thank you, Linda. No.
Okay.
No questions on live chat at the moment. Oh, Dina's just come in, and you say about listening to them first, but what if they want to get on with something and are worried about money on the per hour rate? Good question. What do you think, guys?
Look, it only could be, 5 minutes. It's not as if you're going to sit there for half an hour. Sometimes you can learn everything within a 5-minute period. Then you move on to your shift, or you wait to the end of your shift. And if there's anything they want to talk about, do it then. I mean, it's up to you to manage your time with the person.
Now, guys, let's move on. But if you do have questions, please do post them in, and I'll make sure that Brad and Linda get them.
All right. So now we've covered understanding your client's background. Let's move on to another crucial area, so professional language and sensitivity.
Yeah, so let's start with why professional language and sensitivity really matters in this role. And I know it kind of sounds like a bit of a buzzword, but it's really important because the way that we speak to our clients has a huge impact on how they feel about the care or support that we provide for them. And if we're clear and respectful and sensitive to their needs and spend the time listening to them, then they're way more likely to feel comfortable with us. And that goes back to building that trust. So I guess the thing is that the language we use can either open doors for a better relationship, or if it's not quite right, it can kind of slam them shut as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Brad. And all this really kind of ties into the fact that using clear language helps prevent misunderstanding. And that's pretty huge in this kind of work. Using professional but simple language not only makes things clearer, but also shows respect. So it's really a win-win. And of course, if you're ever feeling unsure about how to phrase things, especially when talking about sensitive stuff, Mable has some great training on this in the Learning Hub, and also some information on our website with some practical tips on how to make your language professional and approachable. Moving on to using clear and simple language. So when we talk to clients, it's important to keep things straightforward. Be really mindful of the language we're using and don't get too kind of caught up in the jargon. We really don't need those fancy terms to sound professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I kind of first started out and did my first few shifts as a support worker, I thought I needed to sound super formal. But the truth is, like, the clients just really appreciate it when you speak to them like a normal person.
Yeah. And if you're ever not sure if they're understanding, just ask. So, you know, simply asking the question, does that make sense? Or let me know if I need to explain that again. That can really clear up any confusion, and it shows that you're invested in making sure they're comfortable and that you're on the same page.
Yeah, totally. And again, like, if you're ever wondering or thinking about, oh, how do I learn more about this stuff after the webinar, then we're going to plug it a bit. But the Mable Learning Hub is a great venue for doing that stuff, and it's, you know, free as a worker on Mable, so yeah, take advantage of it. All right, so on to the next slide, and we're going to talk about cultural differences and personal differences here. So when you're working with people from all different walks of life, it's really important to understand that different cultures, backgrounds, and personalities mean different needs and preferences often. And that's cool. Like, it's really something that we could kind of celebrate about our job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess this next point sort of really speaks to a lot of what we've been saying already. One of the best ways to approach this is to simply ask. Ask the client how they like things to be done. So some people might have dietary restrictions. Maybe they prefer certain words or phrases. Maybe they have practices or traditions that are important to them. If you're unsure, just ask them. So, is there anything special I should know about? Or how do you prefer me to do that? It's simple, but it shows respect.
Yeah, and it's important to keep in mind as well, I guess, Linda, that cultural and personal differences can also affect things like how people perceive personal space and touch. Some clients might not be comfortable with certain physical gestures like a hug or a handshake, while others might really appreciate it. So I guess we've just got to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. And the beauty of this job is that over time, you really will get to know your clients better and to learn those preferences. But the important point, I suppose, here is never stop asking those questions and being open to understanding. And again, you know, have a little look at the Learning Hub. There's some information around that on there too.
Yep. Okay. So we'll just almost finish this section as well. So we'll just wrap this one up with, you know, tone and body language. And again, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Like, if your tone's warm and friendly, it's going to make a huge difference in how your client feels. And as professionals, we've always got to be aware of that. And it's all because it's all about making that connection, right? And that includes something as simple as a smile. It can go a long way, and it really sets that tone for a positive interaction for the day.
Yeah. And body language, it's just as important. So if you're slouched, if you're looking at your phone, you're just not giving your client your full attention, they're actually going to pick up on that. So it can send a message that you're not fully present. But if you make eye contact and you keep your body open and engaged, it really tells your client that you're focused on them.
Yeah. And, you know, if you're, I might open this one up to answer in the chat by typing it in. If you're ever unsure about how to handle body language or non-verbal communication, anyone know where there's some great training available via Mable? See it in the chat? I can't. It's the Learning Hub. So there's loads of stuff in there. So again, like, after this, jump in, have a look around. You'll find there's probably more than you expect in there. Well done, Matt.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so I think now we might flick to Marlene. If there's anything else that you wanted to add or reiterate, again, Marlene, around professional language and sensitivity.
Well, just when you arrive for the shift, as you pointed out earlier, be warm, friendly and approachable. Be aware of your language. Some language may offend some people, because your body language will affect that person while you're there doing the shift with the client. So it's very important, your tone and your body language.
Excellent. Thanks, Marlene.
Righto. So now that we've covered off that stuff, We're going to talk about something equally important and something that some of us love doing or some of us hate doing, and that's writing our support notes. So, support notes aren't just a quick recap of your visit, to tick that box, say that I've done it so I can submit my timesheet and get paid. They're actually way more important than that, because they're actually a legal record of your time with the client. So you've got to kind of think of your support notes as your professional diary. It's where you document what's happened during your visit, what worked, what didn't, and any other important details. Like, the notes that we leave are key for communication, but they're also essential for accountability and just making sure everything that we do is kept above board.
Yeah, that's right, Brad. Support notes are really important. They might be reviewed by family members, by NDIS coordinators, by care managers, and they might even sometimes be viewed in audits. So your notes need to be professional, clear, and objective.
Yeah, and then I guess one of the questions you might be thinking about now is, well, what do I need to include to make my notes clear and useful, right? I guess the first thing is, we've got to write fresh notes for every session. As tempting as it may be, you can't just copy and paste them from a previous visit. And you might think no one will notice, but someone will. And it's just not particularly professional. And it's kind of like, I guess, using the same password for everything. And I'm pretty sure we're all guilty of that at some stage. Like, it's one of those things that might seem easier, but at some stage, it can come back to bite you.
Right. And next up, describe the support you actually provided.
Yeah.
Pretty obvious, I guess. But what exactly did you do during the session? This could include anything from helping the client with personal care, assisting them with mobility, helping them, making sure that they're safe and comfortable, basically whatever it is that you did to help them. So think of the support notes as really your story of the session. It's a factual description of what you did, what you heard, what you saw. And if you kind of think about some of the key things to cover, you might look at it in this simple way. So think about where you were. So, was it in the home or out? When was it? How? What is it that you did? Why? And with whom? Was there anyone else that was involved?
Yeah, and then to build on that, I guess it's also important to outline any key activities or achievements during the session, particularly when they link to the person's goals. So, or did they reach a new milestone? Maybe they stood up on their own for the first time in a few weeks. That's kind of a big deal. And your notes aren't just there for the records. They're also super helpful for any NDIS plan reviews or aged care package upgrades. Our notes show how our clients are really meeting their goals and justifying the funding that they receive, or helping them get upgraded to the next package level as well.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And it's great. We're seeing some questions come through the chat now too, which is excellent. We will come to those at the end of this section, but we've covered some key things that we need to include. I think it's also important to be mindful of what not to include. So it might seem pretty obvious, but things like disrespectful language, any information that breaches that privacy and confidentiality, doesn't have any place as support notes.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the other things that you do need to include are serious incidents. And for those of you that have been around Mable for a while, have submitted a timesheet at least, you'll know that they're in their own section. And one of the things that Mable does is helps you ensure that you meet your obligations when supporting someone. And they make all of that available, and it's super easy and efficient to fill out as well.
That's right. So in case of an incident or dispute, remember this golden rule. You can take something away. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So if something goes wrong and you didn't write it down, it's kind of like it never existed.
Yeah, right. And that's the key point for us as professionals to look after ourselves. So be sure to keep it's up to date, accurate, and factual. It's kind of our chance as support workers to tell that story the way that we saw it.
Yeah, because really, well-written notes today could really save you a lot of headache tomorrow. And there's also some tips on our website about support notes and incident reporting that can be really helpful.
Yeah, so I've just got an example that will be coming up soon of a support note that captures some of the key things in a really nice way. It includes the various activities of what you did, and importantly, kind of makes a note that it was agreed to stay an extra hour on the next visit to clean the oven. So you can probably just see it up on your screen now.
Yeah. And it's really great how it captures not just the agreement to stay longer, but also the reasoning for it. So this note, what's nice about this note is that it stays professional, even with that personal touch of sharing a cup of tea. It's a nice little piece of detail that shows you're building rapport and respecting your client's preferences, but it's not oversharing or unprofessional.
Yep. And now we'll just take a look at, so that was more of an aged care note. So we'll have a quick look at an NDIS participant example now. And what's great about this one is it outlines the actual steps the worker took, you know, using an app, walking to the station, catching the train, you know, even having an ice cream.
Yeah. And I think one of the other key things to call out in this one is that the note includes feedback from Chris saying how, so Chris the participant, actually saying how he's becoming more confident using the app and selecting the right platform and his Opal card. So including that really links it back to Chris's goals and shows the progress. And when his NDIS coordinator looks at that, it's obvious that that support is directly linked to his goal of building independence around transport.
Yep. And then I guess the next big thing about support notes is the timing. You know, so timing is key when it comes to submitting kind of our support hours and notes. Now, ideally, you want to submit them within 24 hours of the session taking place. And the reason for that is that if you wait too long, there's a bit of a risk of that your support hours might be rejected or your payment will get delayed. I'm sure we've all had that bugger of missing the Mable's Wednesday invoice run because we didn't get our support notes in time. So that avoids that. Plus, the longer that you leave your notes, the harder it can be to remember some of those details, right? So it's good professionally and also personally for the pay runs just to get in the habit of submitting those notes straight away or as soon as you can after the session.
And so while we're on the topic of that, don't forget about the quality of your notes. So yeah, it's timeliness, but it's also quality. So if the notes aren't clear or if the activities don't match what you were actually booked to do, you could run into the same issues. So payment delays or rejections. So make sure your support notes are clear, complete, and accurately reflect what you actually did during the session.
Yeah. So the moral of kind of that story is like submit your hours and notes within 24 hours, and then also make sure that they're top-notch notes as well. That way we're avoiding delays and just making sure everything's is running smoothly.
Okay, so let's have a little bit of a chat about who actually sees your support notes. Because it's important to know this, it really helps you understand who your audience is for the notes. So let's run through the list.
Yeah, so the first person is the person managing the client's Mable account, or potentially the person themselves. Pretty straightforward, right?
Yep. And then there's Mable's finance or customer support team. And yes, they could certainly have a look if they need.
And then insurance companies might see a note if there's a claim. So keep that in mind when you're writing them, particularly around that professional language.
And the Mable Trust and Safety team. So they might need to review them too, just to make sure everything is above board.
Yeah, and then in some cases, legal or regulatory bodies could be reviewing your notes as well if required. So yeah, like a pretty wide range of people might be reading them.
And I guess what we really want to share is, what does that mean for you? It's all about writing your notes with care. So you never know who could be reading them. It could be family, professionals. It could actually even be legal teams. It's really a reflection of your professionalism, and it's key to building trust.
Yeah, so you can see there's some nice points coming through in the chat there. So, like, I guess when in doubt, like, keep your notes professional, clear, and factual, because as Linda said, that there's going to be a lot of eyes on them.
And as we just move to the next one, speaking of who's kind of looking at your notes, here's the part that gives you a little bit more control. So you can actually decide how much of your health and wellbeing notes are shared. So in your Mable account, there's an option to turn sharing on or off.
Yeah, so when sharing's off, only the home care package provider or the client, if they request it, will be able to access those notes.
But if the sharing is on, then self-managed clients can view those notes directly in their support hours. And if the client is coordinator managed, then only the home care package provider or their coordinator actually has access.
Yeah, and just a quick heads up, if your client's using NDIS funding, their coordinator or plan manager won't be able to access the notes unless they specifically ask for them.
Alrighty. So that kind of wraps up our key content around support notes, and it's been great. We've seen a number of questions come in. So while the team has a little bit of a look through those, and we'll draw out just maybe a couple, and then others, we'll see if we can respond to those in the follow-up email. But I think we'll take advantage of the experience that we've got here with Marlene, and if we can flick to you again, Marlene, to share your tips on support notes and what to be mindful of.
Thank you, Linda. It's very, very important that you write your notes as soon as you've finished your shift, because sometimes if you don't, you may forget. If you leave it an hour or at the end of the day, that you may forget something. And also if you have a number of clients, you may become confused what happened at the earlier shift or the later shift. So that's why I suggest you write your notes as soon as possible. Put the time you arrive, the time you leave, but use plain, simple language, because your notes can be subpoenaed into a court of law if that needs to happen. So you have to be clear about what you saw on the day, what you heard on the day, what the client said, what you do. So it's very, very important to document, and do it as soon as you can once you've finished your shift. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Marlene. We've had some good questions, and we've actually had some good advice as well. So Susanna says that she likes to use headings, which I think is a really good idea to help break down those support notes, especially having a header around the plan for the next session as well, so that people know. Louise has also said that notes should be your observation, not your personal opinion. So she likes to start a sentence with, I observed this happened today, something like that. So that's another great tip. Thank you, Louise. We did have one question, and that was from Dina, and she said, how long do good support notes take?
Depends on how much you want to write, I suppose. I mean, that's why you've just got to use plain, simple language and factual. They don't ramble on. Just say, say what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what you smelt. Just very short sentences. Don't go on waffling on in paragraphs. So it's got to be clear and concise. I mean, have a look on the Mable website. They give good examples of how to write progress notes.
Thanks, Marlene. I'm just going to quickly... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, so I was just going to pick up on Marlene's point. So, I mean, like kind of 2 to 5 minutes should still be sufficient time to allow you to write some decent notes, I imagine, Marlene?
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, as I said, it doesn't have to be paragraphs long. It's just very short. Like, as Linda said, could take up 5 minutes. Depends what you do with your person on the day. A good 5 minutes, but do it. My suggestion is do it at the end of each shift if you can, because that's where, you'll remember the most as soon as you finish that shift.
Thanks, Marlene. And Birgitta, I did put a link to a session that's for, it's called the Securing Your First Client session. I put a link to it earlier, so that might be a good session for you to attend as well. Oh, yes, helpful to have the 5-minute guideline, so you're not too waffly. Perfect.
Yeah. And the thing is, when you have your first meet and greet or your first shift with your person, always let them know that you'll be writing a file note on what happened on that day with them. So let them know that you'll be doing that at the end of the day, because some people may not realise you do that, or they've probably been told, but they might have forgotten. But remind them at the meet and the greet or the first shift that that's what you are legally obligated to do. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Is there anything else outstanding from the chat box?
No.
All right. So we might then, let's dive into, and we will go through the chat too. If there's anything else that we've kind of missed, we'll see if we can follow that up at the end. So let's cover off understanding and maintaining professional boundaries, because this one's really key to keeping things respectful, safe, and pretty obviously professional.
Yeah, so I guess maybe we can, start by covering off what the professional boundaries really mean.
Indeed, it's a good question. So professional boundaries are essentially the guidelines and rules that make sure the relationship between you and your client stays safe and appropriate. So they really help keep everything clear, focused, and importantly, respectful.
Yeah, and I guess these boundaries aren't something that you do once you're in a kind of a working relationship with the client. It's kind of, they're important from your first interaction with that client. You really want to set that appropriate tone from the beginning, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the main purpose of professional boundaries is to keep that relationship between you and your client professional and focused on the support that you're providing.
Yeah, and it's kind of not just about keeping things professional for the sake of it. It's kind of also about safety. For both the client and yourselves as workers, by setting clear expectations and sticking to them, you're kind of creating a safe space where everyone knows their roles.
Yeah, and you're also preventing any confusion. So it's important to keep those roles and the parameters really kind of clear, so there's no misunderstandings down the road.
Yeah, so, whether it's making sure you're not stepping into personal territory or knowing when to say no to something outside of your job description, and we've seen a bit of that on the worker page, professional boundaries will help us navigate that situation without overstepping the mark.
Yeah, at the end of the day, those boundaries are there to protect both you and the client and to make sure that everything stays respectful and safe.
Yeah, so I guess then that leads us on to what happens if, as support workers, we don't maintain these boundaries, right? I guess the answer would be like, well, it can get a little messy pretty quickly.
Definitely. So one of the biggest issues is getting too involved or too attached to a client. You're in this caring space. It's what attracts a lot of people to it. We all want to help, but there's a fine line between being a supportive worker and getting emotionally entangled.
Yeah, and I guess another one is treating a client like they're special or exceptional in a way that blurs the line. Like, it can be kind, for sure, but you don't really want to start making exceptions for them, especially if it goes against the professional expectations of your role.
Yeah. Then there's mixing emotions or blurring the line between work and home life. Another really tricky one. So it can be easy to fall into a bit of a pattern where it feels like you're just kind of hanging out with them like a friend, but that's not what this relationship is actually about. You're there to provide that support. It's not about hanging out with somebody like you would a mate. There's a professional element to that relationship.
Yeah, and building on from that is like sharing too much personal information, whether it's about your client or oversharing about yourself. Too much personal info doesn't sometimes just make things awkward, and it can also compromise that professional trust that you work so hard to build.
And another tricky one is seeing your client only as a friend or letting them think of you that way. So it can be really tempting. You're very much trying to support them, build that relationship. But when you're working with someone, you are their support worker rather than their friend. And that needs to be maintained.
Yeah, and sometimes those boundaries can get really tricky, right? And they're often tied to our personal values. those can change over time as the relationship develops. And I guess a good tip around that is to regularly just to check in with yourself and be aware of where those boundaries are and where you sit within them.
Yeah, and it's about maintaining that balance. So you really do want to be supportive, be friendly, but always remember that you're there to do a job and that you're being paid to do that job, and having those professional boundaries in place really maintains that level of professionalism for you both.
Yeah. So then I guess kind of the next thing that we need to start thinking about is, well, how do we spot any early warning signs when it comes to kind of professional boundary issues? As support workers, you or we might find ourselves in a lot of personal situations, whether it's with clients, their families, even their friends at some stages.
Yeah, so you might have access to some pretty private information, so their personal, financial, or even medical information. And while it's important to build trust with your clients, it's crucial to keep that professional distance.
Yeah, right. But like, how do you even know when your boundaries are being crossed, right? Well, we've got a few signs that you could keep an eye out for.
Right, so first one is if you start discussing personal stuff, so financial issues, relationship drama, discussing that with the client, that's pretty much a red flag. So you want to keep things professional and not share, your entire life story over that cup of tea.
Yeah, and speaking of the cup of tea, some clients or the family will start asking favors like, "Hey, can you pick up my groceries on your way home?" That's something to be cautious about as well, because it's often not part of the job description. And it gets trickier if you find yourself visiting clients outside of your working hours, or if they start asking you to come over when you're off duty or it's not in your agreement. Again, that's where you have to hold the line at times.
Yeah. And sort of back to that, picking up things, grabbing a cup of coffee, morning tea, or even lunch is, very much part of everyday life. And we understand that that's not unusual for that to come up when you're providing support to your clients. So particularly if you're offering that social support. But when we get to things like expecting food or refreshments to be provided by the client, that can really start to cross the line of professional boundaries. So if there's reasons that the both of you, you and the client mutually agree that that's how things are going to be, it's a pretty good idea just to pop that into your service agreement so that it's clear that that is part of the arrangement that has been agreed between the two of you.
Yeah. And another thing that can often come up is regularly being asked to stay much longer than your scheduled shift. Sometimes clients may get comfortable with this as workers, but we have to remember that our time is valuable, so we've got to set limits. It can be worth noting things down around this stuff in your shift notes, because sometimes it can actually really help the client. Because if it becomes clear that the reason they're asking you to stay is because they need more support, then it can be a good trigger for the case manager or the NDIS coordinator to request a package upgrade or look for a plan review.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brad. And if you ever feel like your boundaries are actually being pushed, don't hesitate to talk about it. A simple conversation with your client or their carer can really help re-establish where those boundaries should be. So it's better to address it early before it becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah, it's all about keeping things kind of clear, respectful, and you can still be really supportive without crossing those lines. Right, so let's have a look at how we can keep those professional boundaries strong. So first up, clarity on roles. This one's huge. You've got to be really clear about what you're responsible for and what you're not.
Yeah, so you don't want to end up in a situation where your client thinks you're also their personal shopper or therapist. You know what's in your job description and you stick to that. So if things start to change over the time, maybe look at amending your service agreement so that it clearly reflects what's in and what's out of scope when you're actually providing support, because we know that things can change over time.
Yep, exactly. And that leads us to communication. It's all about being upfront with your clients about your professional limits. And if you're not comfortable doing something, or if it's outside of your role, it's totally okay to say so.
Yep, so think of it like setting expectations from the start, makes everything smoother. Being clear with your client helps them understand where the line is and why it's there.
Yep, and then we get on to the third one, which is self-reflection. So this one's kind of like checking in with yourself. You regularly assess how your interactions are going with your clients, how you're feeling, if things are on track. It really just helps keep that professionalism up.
Yeah, and it's important to step back and reflect because maybe even have a read over the information on our website relating to professional boundaries. If you start feeling a bit too comfortable or unsure, it's time to ask yourself, am I maintaining those boundaries? And if not, maybe it's time to reset them and, also then maybe revisit your service agreement around that as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about just staying on top of things to keep the relationship professional, respectful, and most importantly, of course, safe for both you and your client.
All right, so let's get to the tricky one. Let's talk about gifts. So every now and then, clients or their families might offer you a gift as a way of saying thank you for the work that you've done. Could be something small like chocolates, flowers, or even a card.
Yeah, and obviously it's nice to be appreciated, but it's important to be cautious with accepting gifts, especially if it's something more expensive, or let's just say a little too fancy for your usual thank you moment.
Yeah, so that's it. The small token like your chocolates, sure, no big deal. But when it comes to money or high value items, it really is a different story. And in that instance, you can politely say something like, your thanks are enough. This is my job.
Yeah, and just to keep everything completely clear, Mabel's got a pretty strict policy about gift acceptance. So if you're working with the client through the platform, you can't accept gifts at all. It's just one of those things that's part of the terms and conditions as workers on Mable.
Yeah.
Through Mable.
And we recognise it might feel a little awkward at first, but just remember it's certainly not personal. You're sticking to the rules, and that's really what's important. And it is designed to be there for the protection of you both. Plus, if you're ever unsure about a situation, it's always okay to check with your coordinator. You can check with the Mable team via the online chat function, and they can help you navigate the tricky stuff like that.
Yep, righto. So let's quickly, as we're coming to an end, talk about what to do if something goes wrong, because unfortunately incidents can happen. So the first thing you need to do is report an incident, no matter how big or small. You want to make sure it's documented, going back to that note-taking section.
Yeah, and the next step is to contact Mable. So you do that via the online chat function. That's really the best way to get immediate support from the platform. They can help you navigate those next steps, and whether that's offering advice or whether it's actually handling it through the Mable team in turn.
Yep, and then if it's something that affects the client's care or safety, you may also need to reach out to the client's coordinator. They're the ones overseeing the plan and can take additional action if needed.
Yeah. One of the other things that you can do if you do need help is you can make use of the counselling service that's available through Mable. As a number of the benefits that Mable provides to support our workers, there is a 24/7 counselling service available. And I guess, the main thing is don't forget that you're not alone in this. Have I skipped your one, Brad?
No, we did miss getting in a final plug for the Mable Learning Hub. So there's a bunch of training on there around incident reporting and that sort of stuff, and professional boundaries. So do jump on there as well. Now, we've covered a bit of ground so far, and we're getting pretty close to time. And I know we've been talking non-stop. So we've got a bit of time for questions here. I think there's be a few in the chat box.
Yeah. We'll I have a good one from Stella. Stella wants to know, what do you do if someone suggests going off platform?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So people often ask, all right, let's take this off Mable. And there's a couple of answers to that one. One, as support workers, we're in breach of our arrangement with Mable if we do that. So it's a hard no there, because we don't want to breach our agreement with Mable, because it's a great avenue to find new work, and it has a great facility for all these things that make us more professional workers. So it's got that great note-taking capability, so you don't have some shift notes in a book, some shift notes on a computer, some shift notes on a piece of paper floating around in your car. It just really professionalizes us as practitioners. And of course, it's got the good insurance, and it's got the access to free counselling. And I'm not sure if we've mentioned the Mable Learning Hub or not. But if you keep stuff on platform, it really opens up all those benefits to us as workers. Plus, it keeps us safe, and it keeps us insured, because if something goes wrong, quite often it goes really wrong, and then everything's on the line. If we don't have the right insurance with Mable, we're covered there. And from a client's point of view, it's also great to keep things on platform, because they know that they're protected as well. That if ever there's an audit, or if something goes wrong, or we do something negligent as workers, then they're insured as well. So for everyone's kind of safety and professionalism, it's so much easier for everyone if it's just kept on-platform.
Cool, thanks, Brad. This is a question from Paul. He said, what should you do if you are aware another worker's breaching personal boundaries?
Mum, I might throw to you on that one. You're a professional here.
To me, sorry?
Yeah.
Well, you just have to be professional in your role. If you're aware that another person is breaching, that's a really hard one. I would ring Mable. That's what I would do as a worker, is ring Mable and discuss with them. That would be, I think, the best option for you to do that, because you can't get too involved or attached to your clients, because you're there to protect your client from any harm, or from the support worker as well, and the support worker needs to be kept safe as well. So I would ring Mable and discuss that with them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And at Mable, there's a big trust. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background of Mable that kind of people aren't often aware of, and there's a big trust and safety team that would do things like this regularly. So we'd fall into their remit to look into it and see the best way to handle that one, Paul.
Yeah, because it can have long-term repercussions if someone is getting too close to a client. Well, as someone said, yes, if you know the worker, speak to them first and make them aware that they are crossing the boundaries, and are they aware of what they're doing? Because it does put you in a really hard place when you become too attached, or we're getting too involved in a client. It's hard to do that, then try and pull back, because you may hurt them emotionally if you do that.
And it might also be worthwhile if that person has a support coordinator in place. It might actually be, I don't know the situation, but if you're part of the same team and therefore you have that relationship with the support coordinator, it could be worthwhile just making gentle mention that you have some concerns about the professional boundaries, which just might alert that coordinator to keep a bit of a closer eye and start to perhaps even reach out and ask the client some questions around that.
Yeah, I agree.
Great.
Thanks, Linda. I'm just going to take this as the last question. If you and the client visit their family and they bring food, what can you do?
What was that? If you and your client visit the family, and the family bring food, so is it an organised event that you are going with the client to visit the family, or is it outside of work?
That was the only questions in the comment. I don't know if you're still around. It was someone who wrote on an iPhone. Do you want to clarify that? And Anne has just suggested she used to just take her own food just in case, so she could eat it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would take my own food, but if it's an organised event, and you're being paid for it as a support worker, I would take my own food as well. Yep.
And Catherine, yes, there is a recording. We'll send it out to you tomorrow along with a survey so that you can let us know what you thought of the webinar. And of course, always let us know if there's any topics that you want to hear, because we're very keen to know what you'd like to hear. It's a monthly webinar, so we want to make sure that it's things that you want to hear about. And finally, Paul, support worker Paul also posted that there is a support worker meetup coming up in Sydney, and there's also going to be one in Adelaide coming up soon. You can find these events on our event page if you're keen to come along.
Great.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks
everyone.
to everyone. And can we do a big call out to a number of the people that have provided some great suggestions in the chat function as well? I think people have shared their experience and given some good advice, so thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for attending, everyone. Hope you found it useful, and we'll see you at the next one.